Vanakkam. Good evening to all of you. We have all gathered here to discuss a very serious problem of the society. We are discussing today a very serious problem which the society is not willing to address nor even willing to recognize because it is too serious an issue. Trafficking of persons constitutes the third largest global organized crime, next only to drug trafficking and firearm trafficking. And it is growing year on year. The United Nations defines trafficking as any activity leading to recruitment, transportation, harboring, or receipt of persons by means of threat or use of force or a position of vulnerability. It is a $10 billion a year criminal enterprise fueled by a poisonous cocktail of factors including poverty, uneven development, corruption, gender discrimination, harmful traditional and cultural practices, and lack of political will to end these menaces. We have an epidemic that gets but a passing mention in the media, whether it's a TV or in the newspaper. An epidemic that is real and tangible only for those parents who wait for the call that never comes. The child who never returns, who do the rounds of the police stations, photographs in hand, who put out advertisements in the newspapers describing what their child was wearing when he or she went missing. They live a life in limbo. Our children are going missing. One child every minute across India is reported missing. The sheer magnitude of these alarming numbers raises some questions. Are we really a civilized society? Are we living with any sense of conscience? Could there be a more potent form of savagery? In a country of 1.2 billion people, 3 million missing people seem no issue at all to the society. 60% of girls sold in India are from the underprivileged and marginalized segments of societies. They are trafficked mostly on the pretext of a job or a marriage proposal. In some cases, they are knowingly sold off by their parents as a result of desperate poverty. Children are kidnapped for human trafficking, illegal organ transplantation, prostitution, child porn trafficking, child labor in factories, and unpaid domestic help. Many children are forced to beg. Some are even mutilated to evoke sympathy for more earning potential. And a small percentage are also for ransom. Kidnappings for ransom are on the rise, and in some cases, even after paying up, their parents never see their children again. Urban slum children are the most vulnerable as they are easily lured into promise of good food and clothes. According to news reports and NGOs, there are over 800 gangs with 5,000 members involved in the kidnapping and trafficking of children, much in the same way they would traffic drugs or contraband. Some parents are so poor, they don't have recent photographs to give the police to identify them. Children between the age of 6 and 13 are the most targeted and vulnerable. Infants are also taken, sometimes from the very hospitals they are born in or from railway stations and other crowded places. The children who are lucky enough to be found and rescued or have the presence of mind and opportunity to run away speak of being sold into forced labor in the agricultural sector or in factories. Perhaps the most chilling of the recent happenings are the 2006 Nitari killings near Delhi, where the remains of 17 children were found in drains outside a bungalow. Of course, in a rare such case, the owner of the building, a rich man, was prosecuted and convicted. This may be too late for those parents who have waited endlessly. But for those children who have already become statistics in the long list, these measures might not be of any help. But we can and we must push for more attention to the growing menace. We cannot let this get brushed aside under the carpet. It is on the directive of the Honorable Supreme Court of India, while hearing a public interest litigation in December 2015, that the Ministry of Women and Child Development has decided to move a comprehensive legislation that will look beyond the trafficking of women and children for the purpose of sexual exploitation. It is stated that the new law will also have a component for rehabilitation of the victims. The Apex Court felt that there must be a single law that tackles all kinds of trafficking, whether on a national or international scale. The new law will remove the existing ambiguities in definition and have severe penalties for trafficking of minors and in case of repeat offenders. The central government is set to introduce a new legislation that will address human trafficking in all its forms and enforce increased penalties for trafficking of minors and for repeat offenders. The legislation is expected to have a framework that has strong proactive and preventive measures. It is also working on a strong rehabilitative and reformative protocol and to mobilize local leaders in vulnerable areas. The legislation will also work on victim rehabilitatory measures like providing for legal assistance, medical attention, and homes to stay in, apart from imparting them skills to help make them employable in future. There are several sections that look at trafficking, but none that looks at the convergence between various departments. Looking at a comprehensive law that will oversee a multi-stakeholder convergence intervention with measures at both the prosecution and witness levels is what is required. I commend the initiative of the Citizens Forum, Citizens Platform, Care for Children's Project Abhayam, and particularly congratulate and admire those who are responsible for this initiative and the movement, namely Lata Rajinikanth of Daya Foundation, Parthiban of Manita Neya Mandram, and Nirmal of Exonara. Let us make it work. Let us begin and ensure that the law is passed soon and the implementation is done effectively with the vigilance of the society, social movements.
You cannot see this. You cannot do this. We will not process your adoption papers because no child would like to have a blind father. We will not let you fly alone because it's against DGCA guidelines. Bechara, Kismat Kamara. You certainly cannot do this because you cannot see. Unquote. Ladies and gentlemen, if I collected a rupee each time I heard this, I would have become a billionaire by now. I today perhaps am a voice of those who cannot hear, a voice of those who cannot move, a voice of those who cannot see. Please allow me to share a couple of life experience to answer Kiran ma'am's questions. I could never see perfectly well. I was born in a small town called Bhagalpur, Bihar. I only had 50% of my eyesight. I could never see the blackboard. The perceptions of my teachers that I was the dumbest boy in the whole class. Whenever I used to come home, they used to openly feel sorry for my parents because they believed that without eyesight, perhaps there is no future for his parents. In the home business, again, I used to get the same dialogue. Look at the neighbor's son, they're topping the class. Look at you, you're good for nothing. When I used to be the last person to be chosen on a cricket team because I could never see the ball. In the team that I would be selected on, I would definitely be the team that would lose. My principal would call my father and my uncle and demand, take this child away because he's ruining the educational environment. He's good for nothing. And the worst thing of the whole thing is that I started to believe that I was incapable. I started to believe that I could not make it. I started to believe that I was not meant for learning. And as a consequence, I had to repeat a class 2 for a year. And I had to repeat a class 2 in class 4. Well, I firmly believe that God has a plan for each one of us sitting in this audience and on the stage. And He has sent my uncle, who was an orthopedic surgeon, and my older brother of my father, and his wife, who was a white American, to India when I was only 11. My aunt thought that let's take him to the US, give him education, give him treatment. Perhaps his life will be transformed. I went to the US at the age of 11. I could not even speak English. But I still remember the first time I ran the race, and I was the last person to finish that touch line. And then my teacher walked up to me and he said, "Hey, Asif, you did a good job. Keep it up." For that moment, I thought maybe these Americans are actually crazy. They think being the last one is a good job. I still remember the days that I got my first report card where I was failing in all my classes and just passing in 2. I was scared to show my report card to my American mom. With the hope, with the fear, again the same dialogue. Asif, you're incapable. Asif, you're worthless. Asif, you're good for nothing. Somehow I managed to show the report card to her, and I was, to my surprise, quote, "Honey, considering the fact that you've been to the United States for the first time, learning new language, learning new culture, I think you did pretty good. But you have potential to do much better." At the first time in my entire life, I heard something positive from my own loved one. And I started to believe that yes, I can actually study. I actually started to take interest towards studies. I actually started to approach my teachers for help. And they would proactively help me all my weak domains like math and science. And yes, the one day that actually came when I actually got over 90% in all my classes. But something also terrible happened that year. My eyesight from 50% started to reduce at a very rapid speed. The world was again full of darkness. I started to get depressed. And I started to question, why me? I started to feel sorry for myself and perhaps that I could not survive this life without my eyesight. My teacher tried to convince me, "Hey Asif, you can learn alternative techniques to overcome your disability." But I was living in a fool's world. My mom tried to tell me, "Hey Asif, you have a beautiful brain, so why don't you make the most utility out of the limited resources you have?" But nothing seemed to convince me, and my depression started to sink more and more. The academics started to toss. One day, I remember this exact quote. My teacher got irritated with me and he said, "Asif, you have 2 choices. Choice A, accept the fact you're blind. Learn or do nothing. Be miserable. Be no one. Choice B, accept the fact you're going blind. Learn alternative techniques to overcome them and do wonders." And that kind of clicked. And I actually learned how to use a computer with the help of a software, which I'll show you in a little bit. I actually learned how to live on independent skills. I actually learned how to travel across the streets. And yes, without my eyesight, I actually graduated high school with over 90%. Well, I had to come back to India, and I wanted to pursue my graduations and MBA. I never claim that I'm a genius. I'm just an average person willing to excel if I'm given an opportunity to excel. I was in my second year of a BCom when I actually wrote a letter to the IIM's chairperson expressing my desire that can I appear in the exams? Is there any reservation quota as mandated by the People with Disability Act 1995? Can you allow me to hire a writer whose job would be to read out the question paper and for me to call out the answers? And then I got a letter back that no such provisions exist. You can hire your own writer. Then I immediately filed a lawsuit, and the outcome of that lawsuit that they actually initiated a reservation quota for the disabled across IIMs, IITs, and all government education. I remember the days when I applied to one coaching institute where I actually, just like all the average persons, that I can learn the strategy how to crack the top B school. But I was told, hey Asif, we have no experience in teaching blind or visually impaired. We know you will fail. And we don't want to. I thought that this is one of a story. I've heard this many times, so let me try it again. Unfortunately, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, and the seventh coaching institute actually finally managed to agreed to admit me. The next battle was to find a guy or a girl who would actually work with me 3 to 5 days a week for 2 hours, be as my writer. I thought the job was easy, placed an ad in the newspaper, got a lot of phone calls. I was extremely excited, get to pick the best one out. When I start calling each one of them, and then I get the same answer, Asif, I would love to help you out, but my mother won't. Asif, I would love to help you out, but my father is adamant that I should not go to a Muslim area. I was absolutely disheartened. But somehow somebody advised me, keep visiting the colleges. The struggle continued, and I finally managed to find an engineering guy who said, I will work with you only 3 days a week for 2 hours. I said, okay, something is better than nothing. And then then I finally worked with him, and then I asked for my coaching head, sir, can you please give me a soft copy? And he said, no, sorry, cannot. It is a violation of intellectual property copyright. I said, sir, but I cannot see, but the other people, they can actually see with their own eyes. But, okay, so then I argued and argued, but no soft copy was given. Then I finally found a soft copy on the net which had the question papers. Then that continued. I appeared for several exams, failed. I appeared for symbiosis, failed. I wrote a letter to Professor Pillai, who was in the audience, and he told me that I will only give you admission only on one condition. You will not seek any lower concession. You will not seek any lower standard. And you will have to comply with yoga, meditation, and all other activities. I said, give me an opportunity and I'll prove my worth. So ladies and gentlemen, with this, I'd like to show you how I work on the computer. It's basically, I use a screen reader. So whatever is on the screen, it says it out loud. So it says, right? So it's talking to me whatever is on the screen. And it is a wonderful software which works on the internet. It works on Lotus Notes which we use, and it works really well with all the technology. I use an iPhone, which all the iPhones have an inbuilt software. And this is a short video clip of me climbing down. Sorry. Okay. Okay. So I use all those Excel sheet for my data analysis, which I am required to do as a consultant. And to conclude, basically, we all know that there are approximately 80 to 100 million people in India who are disabled. Can we have an India ignoring this cater? Can we have an India, we talk about being digital India, whereas most of the websites are not accessible. We talk about the barriers, where there are steps, and my movement impaired friends, they cannot climb the mountain that they have to. Is this the India that we aspire? Of course not. I'd like to end by one last sentence. Vivekananda once said, he was sitting in that audience and he was meditating. One of the disciples came to him and he said, Swamiji, I have a bad news to share. And so, my relative has a disease and he's going to lose his eyesight. Swamiji did not reply. Again, the disciple thought that he did not hear him. Then he said in the loudest voice, Swamiji, my relative is going blind. Swamiji got irritated and he said, you fool. He may be losing his eyesight, but he has not lost the vision. So ladies and gentlemen, awaken your vision to awaken your vision to recognize the talent in everyone. Awaken your vision to build an inclusive India. Awaken a vision to build a nation which recognize all and there is a barrier-free environment for everyone. Thank you. Dream and Drive.